A forced wedding was already underway when the poor farmer leaned toward the bride and whispered something no one else could hear. The church bell was still ringing when Eliza's fingers slipped against the rough wooden pew. Dust drifted through the sunlight, and somewhere outside a horse stamped against the hitching rail. The preacher cleared his throat. The farmer beside her didn't look at the crowd. Then he leaned closer and said a single sentence that made her forget the debt, the whispers, and the reason she was standing there at all. But what did he know that she didn't? If stories of love, courage, and second chances speak to your heart, stay with us and join the journey. The summer of 1886 had baked Cottonwood Creek until the ground cracked like old leather. Dust followed every wagon. Wheat fields stood thin and pale beneath the Montana sun. Even the creek that gave the valley its name had shrunk into a narrow ribbon winding between stones. Eliza Grant stood outside the white church, with a ledger tucked beneath one arm and a basket of fresh rolls beneath the other. The smell of yeast and flour clung to her dress. It was the same dress she wore to work at the general store 6 days a week. She had just stepped onto the boardwalk when a voice cut across the crowd. 3 days. Silas Crow stood near the church gate, holding a folded paper. 3 days, he repeated. After that, the debt becomes mine to collect however I see fit. People slowed their steps. Nobody liked Silas Crow. Nobody challenged him either. Eliza saw her Aunt Martha lower her eyes. That hurt more than the words. The debt had started with drought, then seed purchases, then repairs to a roof after a winter storm. Each signature had seemed small at the time. Now the total sat in black ink at the bottom of the page. $180. More money than they could hope to gather. Silas unfolded the paper. If payment cannot be made, the house will be seized. The churchyard fell quiet. A wagon creaked somewhere down the road. Someone coughed. No one spoke. Then Silas looked directly at Eliza. There is another arrangement. A cold feeling settled into her stomach. From the edge of the crowd, a horse stepped forward. Its rider swung down without hurry. Wade Harper. Dust covered his boots. His hat shaded most of his face. He looked exactly as people described him. Quiet, poor, always alone. Silas smiled. Mr. Harper needs help on his farm. Eliza felt every eye turn toward her. The debt disappears, Silas said, if the two of you marry. The silence that followed seemed endless. A child dropped a tin cup. It clattered against the church steps. Nobody moved. Eliza looked at Wade. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't looking pleased. If anything, he looked tired. I didn't ask for this, Wade said. Neither did she, Silas replied. Martha's fingers trembled against her skirt. The sun beat down on the church roof. The crowd waited. And slowly, painfully, Eliza realized there was no miracle coming. No hidden money. No rescue. No other offer. Before the afternoon ended, she stood before the preacher. The vows felt distant, like words spoken to someone else. When it was over, people drifted away in uneasy silence. No celebration followed, no music, no supper, only dust and heat and the sound of wagon wheels fading down the road. Wade helped load her single trunk into his wagon. Neither spoke for several minutes. The horses started forward. Cottonwood Creek disappeared behind them. At last, Wade broke the silence. You don't owe me anything. Eliza turned toward him. For the first time all day, surprise crossed her face. I beg your pardon? He kept his eyes on the road. This marriage paid a debt. That's all it did. The wagon rolled between low hills. You'll have your own room. Eliza said nothing. You'll make your own choices. The reins creaked in his hands. And if one day you decide to leave, I won't stop you. Ahead of them, the main road forked. The left path led toward the poor farms everyone knew. The right disappeared between distant ridges. Without hesitation, Wade guided the horses right. Eliza watched the unfamiliar trail stretch toward the mountains. For the first time since the church bell rang that morning, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt curiosity, and she wondered where the man beside her was really taking her. The wagon climbed through a narrow pass between weathered hills. Cottonwood Creek disappeared behind them, replaced by stretches of golden grass that moved beneath the evening wind. Neither spoke much. The silence between them wasn't hostile. It was simply unfamiliar. A little before sunset, the trail curved around a stand of cottonwood trees. Then Eliza saw it. A small farmhouse stood beside a stream fed by spring water from the hills. The paint had long faded from the walls, but the roof was solid. A vegetable patch sat behind the house. Smoke drifted from a stone chimney. A red barn stood beyond the pasture. The place wasn't rich, but it was cared for. Wade pulled the horses to a stop. "We're here." Eliza climbed down slowly. She looked around. No broken windows, no collapsing porch, no signs of neglect. Only a quiet farm that seemed to have survived through stubbornness. Wade carried her trunk inside. The front room smelled faintly of coffee, leather, and pine wood. A lantern hung beside the door. A rifle rested above the fireplace. Nothing fancy. Everything useful. Wade led her toward a room at the back of the house. "This one's yours." He opened the door. Eliza stopped. A narrow bed stood beneath the window. A quilt folded neatly at the foot. A wash basin rested on a small table. Beside it sat a writing desk. A real writing desk. Not large, not expensive, but polished clean. Wade placed a brass key beside it. "The lock works." She looked at him. "The key?" "For your room." For a moment she didn't answer. No one had ever handed her a key to anything, not something that belonged only to her. Wade nodded once and stepped back. "Supper's at 6 if you're hungry." Then he left her alone. The door closed softly behind him. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped beneath her weight. Outside, she heard horses moving in the pasture. A gate creaked. Then the distant sound of Wade splitting firewood. Steady, rhythmic, like a man keeping busy because he didn't know what else to do. The next morning began before sunrise. Eliza woke to the smell of coffee. When she stepped into the kitchen, Wade was already dressed for work. A skillet sat on the stove. 2 cups waited on the table. Neither mentioned the marriage. Neither seemed ready. Instead, Wade slid a small ledger across the table. "I sell grain in Silver Run every other week." Eliza looked at the pages. Numbers, receipts, weights, costs, entries made with neat but uncertain handwriting. "You keep these yourself?" He nodded. "I'm not very good at it." That was obvious. Several totals were wrong. A few pages were missing dates. Eliza reached for a pencil. Without thinking, she corrected 3 columns. Wade watched. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. By noon, she was organizing inventory in the storage room. By evening, she had balanced 2 months of records. 3 days later, Wade stopped searching for misplaced receipts because Eliza always knew exactly where they were. Life settled into a strange rhythm. Comfortable. Careful. One afternoon, while dusting a bookshelf in the front room, Eliza noticed a loose board beneath the bottom shelf. Curiosity got the better of her. She lifted it. A small wooden box sat hidden beneath. Her hands froze. Letters. Dozens of them, tied neatly with faded twine. She shouldn't have looked. She knew that. Yet one envelope had already slipped loose. The handwriting caught her eye. Her breath slowed. A single sentence appeared near the bottom of the page. "Some people survive because they keep moving. Others survive because they finally stop." Eliza stared at the words. Years ago, she had written something remarkably similar. To a cowboy she never met. To a man who had once repaired a broken fence during a storm and disappeared before morning. a man she had written letters to for nearly 3 years. Slowly, she closed the box. Her pulse had begun to quicken. That evening, she ate supper across from Wade. The lantern cast warm light across the table. Neither said much, but several times she caught herself studying him. The way he listened before speaking. The way he folded letters from suppliers instead of crumpling them. The way he looked out the window whenever something troubled him. Small things. Nothing that proved anything. And yet, later that night, after Wade had gone outside to secure the barn doors, Eliza unlocked her trunk. Beneath folded dresses sat her own wooden box. Inside were letters, dozens of them. The letters she had written, the letters she had received, the letters from a cowboy whose face she had never seen clearly. A sudden sound shattered the quiet. A horse screamed from outside. Eliza jumped to her feet. Then came another noise. Wood splintering. A crash from the barn. Wade's voice rang out across the darkness. Sharp. Alert. Eliza rushed to the window. A shadow disappeared beyond the pasture fence. The barn door swung crooked on one hinge, and for the first time since arriving at the farm, she realized something troubling. Someone wasn't merely gossiping about Wade Harper. Someone was coming after him. The broken barn door was repaired before sunrise. Wade worked without complaint. A hammer hung from his belt. Fresh boards rested against the frame. By breakfast, only the new wood gave away what had happened. Eliza watched from the kitchen window. He never mentioned the shadow she had seen crossing the pasture. He never mentioned the damage. But the muscles in his jaw stayed tight all morning. By the end of the week, trouble found them again. Someone cut a section of fence along the north pasture. 2 calves wandered nearly half a mile before Wade found them. 3 days later, the irrigation gate feeding water from the creek was jammed with rocks. The message was clear. The attacks were small, deliberate, designed to wear a person down. Saturday brought them into Silver Run. Wade loaded grain sacks onto the wagon while Eliza carried ledgers and receipts to the general store. The moment they stepped onto Main Street, conversations slowed. Not stopped, just slowed enough to be noticed. Near the barber shop, 2 men watched them pass. Outside the mercantile, a woman whispered something behind her hand. Eliza kept walking. At first she pretended not to hear. Then she did. Bought himself a wife, cheaper than hiring help. The words followed them down the boardwalk. Wade heard them too. His expression never changed. That somehow made it worse. Late that afternoon, they stopped beside the hitching rail outside the feed store. "I can go," Eliza said quietly. Wade looked up from tightening a strap. "What?" "I can leave." The wind rattled a loose sign overhead. "If I'm the reason they're targeting you, I can go." For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then he shook his head. "No. You don't know that." "I do." His answer came too quickly, too firmly. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Wade rested both hands on the wagon rail. "There was a time," he said, looking past her toward the distant hills, "when I worked for men connected to Silas Crow." Eliza felt her stomach tighten. Wade continued. "They bought land cheap, sometimes fair, sometimes not." A freight wagon rolled past behind them. Neither moved. "I thought I was helping build ranches." His voice lowered. "Then I learned what was really happening." He looked down at his hands. They pushed families off land they couldn't defend, changed records, used debt the way some men use a rope. Eliza said nothing. "I left." The words were simple, but the years behind them weren't. "I left and never went back." "And they've been after you since?" Wade nodded. "Some men don't like witnesses." The afternoon sun slipped lower across the street. For the first time, Eliza understood why the loneliness around him felt practiced. Not chosen. Practiced. Like something learned through repetition. That night they returned home beneath a sky filled with stars. Neither spoke much during supper. The quiet felt different now, less cautious, more honest. Near midnight, hoofbeats sounded on the road. A lantern bobbed through the darkness. Old Ben Carter climbed down from his wagon carrying a canvas mail sack. I figured these belonged here. He placed a bundle of letters on the table. The twine around them had yellowed with age. Wade froze. Eliza felt her pulse quicken. Old Ben adjusted his spectacles. Storm washed out a storage shed near Helena, found a crate of undelivered mail. The old man smiled faintly. Looks like some folks waited a long time for answers. After he left, silence settled over the room. Wade picked up the first envelope. Eliza recognized the handwriting instantly. Her own. Across the table, Wade slowly opened another letter. His eyes moved over the page, then stopped. The color drained from his face, because he recognized the handwriting too. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. 3 years of letters suddenly stood between them. Not strangers. Not anymore. Just as the realization settled in, hard knocking exploded against the front door. Wade stood immediately. A lantern glowed through the window. A badge flashed beneath it. Sheriff Owen Briggs waited outside, and in his hand was a folded warrant. The lantern beside the door threw long shadows across the porch. For a moment, nobody moved. The bundle of letters still sat open on the table. 3 years of unanswered questions rested between Eliza and Wade. Then Owen knocked again. "Wade, open up." Wade crossed the room and pulled the door open. The sheriff removed his hat. His expression wasn't hostile. That somehow made things worse. "I've got a warrant to search the property." Wade looked at the paper. "On whose complaint?" Owen hesitated. "Vernon Pike filed it this afternoon." Eliza felt her stomach tighten. The town lawyer. Silas's closest ally. Wade stepped aside. "You'd better come in, then." The search lasted nearly an hour. Owen opened drawers, checked storage chests, read inventory books, looked through the barn. Outside, the wind pushed against the walls of the house. Inside, the clock above the stove ticked steadily. Finally, Owen returned carrying a weathered leather folder. He placed it on the kitchen table. "Recognize this?" Wade's face darkened. "No." The sheriff opened it. Inside were copies of land deeds, property records, survey maps. Several pages carried official county stamps. Others looked older, more questionable. They were hidden beneath the west side of your barn. Eliza immediately looked at Wade. His surprise seemed genuine. Not performed, not calculated. Real. Someone had planted them. Owen seemed to reach the same conclusion, but the warrant left him little choice. "I need you to come into Silver Run." Silence filled the room. The lantern flame flickered. Wade looked toward Eliza. For the first time since she had known him, he seemed unsure what to say. Then he walked to a cabinet near the stove. From inside, he removed a small iron key. Old, worn smooth by years of use. He placed it in Eliza's hand. "There's a storage shed behind the north pasture." She stared at the key. "I know the one. Under the floorboards." His voice remained calm. "Look there." Owen glanced between them but said nothing. Wade lowered his voice. "If anything happens, read everything." Eliza's fingers closed around the key. The metal felt cold. "What am I looking for?" A faint sadness crossed his face. "The truth." Before she could ask another question, Owen gently touched Wade's shoulder. It was time to go. Outside, dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. The wagon carrying Wade disappeared down the road. Eliza stood beside the gate long after it vanished. The farm felt different without him. Too quiet. Too large. By midday, she saddled one of the horses and rode toward the north pasture. The storage shed sat near a line of cottonwood trees. Its roof leaned slightly. The padlock opened with the key. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight. At first she found nothing unusual. Old tools, broken harness straps, feed sacks. Then she noticed a loose plank beneath a workbench. Her pulse quickened. She knelt, lifted the board, and froze. Beneath it sat 3 wooden boxes. Inside the first were account books. Inside the second were maps. Inside the third were contracts. Dozens of them. Eliza carried everything back to the house. By evening, the kitchen table had disappeared beneath paperwork. She lit a second lamp, then a third. Page by page, she began reading. Numbers came easily to her, always had. Dates, signatures, property lines, payments. Patterns emerged quickly. The same names appeared again and again. Silas Crow, Vernon Pike. Families who had suddenly lost land. Debts that doubled without explanation. Records altered after signatures were collected. Hours passed. The lamps burned low. Then Eliza found something that stopped her completely. A faded survey map, folded into quarters, marked 20 years earlier. Her eyes moved slowly across the page, then back again. She checked the boundary lines, the creek, the pasture, the farmhouse. Her breathing slowed. Because the name written beside the property wasn't Wade Harper. It wasn't Silas Crow either. It was Hannah Grant, her mother. The room became utterly still. Another document confirmed it, then another, and another. The farm where Wade lived, the land Silas claimed, the property at the center of everything. It had belonged to her family all along. Someone had buried the truth for more than a decade. Outside, thunder rolled far beyond the hills. Eliza stared at the papers spread across the table. The answer had finally surfaced, and now everything depended on what happened next. 3 days later, the church bell in Cottonwood Creek would ring. The entire town would gather. And if she failed to prove what she had found, Wade Harper would walk into a jail cell for a crime he never committed. The church bell rang just after 9 o'clock. Its sound drifted across Cottonwood Creek and over the wheat fields browned by drought. By the time Eliza reached town, every hitching rail was full. Wagons lined the road. Men stood in clusters beneath storefront awnings. Women filled the church steps. The hearing had become the only thing anyone wanted to talk about. Inside, the wooden pews were packed. Sheriff Owen Briggs stood near the front. Vernon Pike sat beside Silas Crow. Neither looked worried. That confidence told Eliza everything she needed to know. They believed they had already won. Wade sat alone near the front of the church. His hands rested quietly on his knees. When he saw Eliza enter, his eyes found hers immediately. No smile, no words, just a look that carried trust. The same trust he had shown the day he handed her a key and told her to find the truth. Eliza walked forward carrying a leather satchel. The church fell silent. Even the floorboards seemed to stop creaking. Vernon rose first. He spoke smoothly, like a man who had practiced every sentence. He presented the folder found beneath Wade's barn. He repeated accusations, missing records, suspicious documents, questions about Wade's past. A few heads nodded. Others remained uncertain. Then Vernon sat down. Silas folded his arms. The matter seemed settled, until Eliza stood. She placed the satchel on a nearby table. One by one, she removed the contents. Account books, survey maps, contracts, receipts. The stack continued growing. Whispers spread through the church. Sheriff Owen stepped forward. "Where did you find these?" "In Wade Harper's storage shed." Silas smiled. A mistake. Or so he thought. Then Eliza opened the first ledger. Page 14. Her voice remained calm. Payment collected from the Miller family. Sheriff Owen examined the page. Page 26. Another entry. Then another. And another. Dates, amounts, signatures, patterns. Every record pointed in the same direction. Properties transferred through false debt. Families forced from land they had already paid for. Each transaction connected back to Silas Crowe, and every legal filing carried Vernon Pike's signature. The confidence slowly disappeared from both men's faces. For nearly an hour, Eliza walked the room through the records. No speeches, no dramatic accusations. Only facts. Only numbers. Only proof. The same skills she had used for years balancing store ledgers now exposed a fraud stretching across half the valley. Then she unfolded the survey map. The church grew quiet again. "This property," she said, touching the faded paper, "was registered 20 years ago." Sheriff Owen studied the document. His eyes narrowed. "Hannah Grant." Eliza nodded. "My mother." A murmur moved through the crowd. Silas shifted in his seat. For the first time all morning, he looked afraid. "The land where Wade Harper lives today," Eliza continued, "never belonged to Silas Crowe. The church became completely still. It belonged to my family." Sheriff Owen compared the survey map to newer records, then to the contracts, then to the county filings. The silence stretched. Finally, he looked up. "These records appear authentic." Vernon stood abruptly. "There must be some misunderstanding." "Sit down." The sheriff's voice carried across the room. Vernon sat. No one spoke. Sheriff Owen turned toward Silas. "Did you knowingly conceal these records?" Silas said nothing. That silence answered more than any denial could. A few minutes later, Owen stepped forward carrying both sets of documents. His decision was short. Wade Harper would be released. The charges were dismissed. A full investigation into Silas Crowe and Vernon Pike would begin immediately. The church erupted. Not loudly, not wildly, but with the collective release of a town finally seeing the truth. For the first time in years, Silas Crowe had nowhere left to hide. As deputies escorted him away, he glanced once toward Eliza. She didn't look back. Some stories no longer deserved her attention. Outside, sunlight poured across Main Street. People gathered around Wade, offering handshakes, nods, apologies. He accepted none of them for long. Instead, his eyes searched the crowd, looking for one person. He found her near the edge of town, standing beside the wooden bridge crossing Cottonwood Creek. The water moved quietly beneath it. Snowmelt from distant mountains. Cold, clear, steady. Wade stopped a few feet away. Neither spoke immediately. The breeze lifted the brim of his hat. At last he smiled. A tired smile, but a real one. "You're free now." Eliza looked down at the folded paper in her hands. The first letter she had ever written. The one old Ben had finally delivered years too late. She held it out. Wade accepted it carefully. The paper had yellowed at the edges. He opened it. Read the final line. Then paused. Because beneath the old words, fresh ink had been added. One new sentence. "Back then I chose the words. Today I choose you." For a long moment he simply stood there, looking at the page, then at her. The creek flowed beneath the bridge. The wind moved through the cottonwood trees. Everything felt strangely quiet, peaceful, as though the valley itself had been waiting for this moment. Months later, a traveler riding through Cottonwood Creek would have seen nothing remarkable. A repaired fence, fresh water moving through irrigation channels, wheat growing stronger than before, a farmhouse beside a stream, a writing desk near a window, 2 coffee cups resting side by side, and 2 people seated at the same table where letters once crossed miles of open country. Now there was no distance left to cross, no unanswered questions, no words waiting for delivery, only the life they chose, together. And maybe that's why this story stays with us long after the last page is turned. Not because a debt was erased, not because the truth finally came to light, but because two people who had every reason to walk away found the courage to stay. Imagine standing where Eliza stood, carrying years of disappointment, believing your future had already been decided by someone else's choices. Then imagine discovering that the person beside you saw your worth long before the rest of the world did. Or imagine being Wade, living with mistakes you couldn't undo, certain that if people knew the whole story, they would leave, then finding someone who looked at the truth and stayed anyway. Life doesn't always give us clean beginnings. Sometimes it gives us broken fences, unanswered letters, and roads we never planned to travel. Yet now and then, if we're willing to keep going, those roads lead us somewhere better than we imagined. Maybe the real gift in this story isn't love alone. Maybe it's the reminder that healing often begins the moment someone chooses to see us clearly, and we choose to believe we're worthy of being seen. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you had been in Eliza's place, would you have stayed or walked away? And if stories like this leave a mark on your heart, I hope you'll join us again. There are still more forgotten roads, hidden truths, second chances, and quiet acts of courage waiting in the stories ahead. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep a little room in your heart for hope.